So, hallo zusammen.
Hello, everybody. I would like to talk to you about Managed Service Edition. Is a quite a large project that we started early this year. The background behind this topic is that we are looking at the operation of service providers, so the systems of other people, and we want to support those in the form of a separate edition. And yeah, I want to tell you a little bit about this. So first of all, let's talk about the term. Yesterday in the final presentation by Daniel, we had the topic, and the question was, what is a managed service? And I tried to put it into 3 points. So I provide a monitoring service somewhere for a third party, for someone else, and I personally perform the monitoring. So if something goes wrong, I perform an action, and the third party can only read the monitoring information or probably receives a report that can be generated. So this is something that we consider a managed service. The precise definition is in the internet on the subscription page. And if you have any questions, the sales people know more about it. So what are the requirements for this? So what do we need as a core for this managed service edition is that we have an environment in which several customers have systems that need to be worked with. So one monitoring system, maybe a distributed environment, one central instance with the provider, and he configures uh, things for different customers who do not know each other or even must not know each other, and he performs the monitoring on one site or several sites per customer, and they usually run within the networks at the customers' sites. So in a classic distributed CheckMK environment, every CheckMK site uh, has the entire configuration pushed upon, and it only uses or puts into the core part of the configuration. So if you have 100 sites and you have the distributed hosts on them, then it's the case that every single site contains the entire CheckMK configuration because it's pushed over by the master, and then they just pick whatever they require on the local side. Especially in a managed service environment, this may be a problem because there could be separate companies which are end customers and they receive a monitoring. And actually, you do not want that all the information that may be confidential, IP addresses, contacts, names, email, so information about organizational structures or components, you do not want that this is given out to third parties, and that's why this is the core aspect of this core of Managed Service Edition. We make sure that the configuration is being thinned out per site, per customer, that only the customer-specific information or the global information get to the site. So this Managed Service Edition, what exactly is that? In the end, it's an extended Enterprise Edition. So we have a hierarchy in there. This is the raw edition with certain features. Then on top of that is the enterprise edition with various components and features. And then on top we have the managed service edition with the features that are quite specific for this edition. So as we consider it an edition, we are in the same life cycle. So the managed service edition has the same version number as CheckMK will have. So the managed service edition is starting at a release of 1.4. Even though we just started working on it the early of the year, it depends on the requirements that the first customers have that want to use it. They do not want to start with the managed service edition in a year because they need a stable version, but they really want to get going. They want to use their features, and that's why we just went for it and put it into the 1.40. And luckily, a majority of the code changes in the CheckMK code, in the general code, were quite little. It's just a few spots where you have to really work on. The majority of the code happens in separate extensions that are only going to be present in the managed service edition anyway. So the influence that this may have on the stability of the enterprise edition or the raw edition should be minimal. I told you that point. The major features is customer management, something that currently is just I'm entering a customer, I put his initials in there so it can be identified. I put an alias in there in which the customer will show up in the GUI. I have a site individual configuration, which means what I configure in the Wato, I can like link to several customers, like one object, one host group is linked to one customer or is linked to all customers or only for the provider. One thing that is now part of the managed service is a customizable logo, so I can, through an upload field, put the logo that usually is a CheckMK logo as a standard version. I can replace that and push it onto my remote site so the customer does understand that this is a monitoring that is just for them. Maybe a little goodie that could be further worked on. The design can be mildly customized. I mean, right now you can change the color coding. The layout, of course, of CheckMK remains the same. The elements remain the same, but the color scheme is something that can be adapted now. And something that was very important for us, because there are managed service providers who use CheckMK in the Enterprise Edition, is that the transition from Enterprise to Managed Service Edition must be smooth as possible. I can have an OMD update, and then bit by bit I can change my customers to Managed Service customers, so they receive the lighter configuration. So these are the major things we have addressed already. Of course, there are still ideas in the room that will be implemented at some point with certain users. So over the course of the year, we still have some work to do until the managed service edition will probably have a lot more features in the 1.5 version. So before going into further conceptual details, I want to talk about the issue of names. A few terms that are of importance in the managed service edition field. One thing would be the name of the product, which is seen just like this. The abbreviation is now CME officially. This is the official name. The person who offers the service is called the provider, and the person who is being monitored in the end is a customer. So talking about the architecture, what does a managed service environment look like? I have at my center the management side where I work with Wato, where the notifications are being sent out. With the notifications is the first point. The concept of the managed service architecture caters for that centralized notifications are being used. It's part of the concept. In detail, of course, with decentralized notifications at the customers, you could do that, but it could lead to problems. So we decided that this is the architecture we want to go for. Then as a provider, I may have systems that I want to monitor myself, so my own systems, central components. The customers may be reliant on those, so right now they have to be monitored at a separate site. So I have a central configuration site and a monitoring site for oneself. Maybe more than one, depends on the architecture, the local architecture. There they have the monitoring core that's looking at the systems at place and the monitoring console, the event console. And then per customer, I may have one site. I could have more sites per customer. Of course, I have a second customer and many more. The point of multiple sites per customer, that is something that is not quite through, because if a customer has several sites, maybe only 2 or 3, or maybe it's 10 for one customer, maybe the customer doesn't want that all of them have a separate GUI, but maybe they want their own overview GUI, so a GUI for all of their systems. Because currently the management system can only be accessed by the provider users. So a customer cannot access that. And it's not possible in many networks because the customer is in his customer network and he cannot like um, access the provider's networks through his GUI. It's not meant to be like this. So that's why we thought of a concept, and it will be implemented at some point, that one of these sites, let's say customer 1 has 2 sites, that one of his sites can be configured in a way that it includes all the other sites into the GUI. So on a status GUI level, when the customer logs in, he cannot only see one site, but can see more than one, as is often the case in other decentralized environments. So it's a feature that will not only be in the managed service edition, but in all other versions too. So even in large distributed environments, I can have a concept with the Enterprise edition that I can build several viewer sites that include other sites. This was possible before, but it wasn't GUI based. You would have to go to the command line and then modify files to get there. And this will be more comfortable in the future. And at this point, we said other users will profit from this, so that's why we want to include it in all versions or all editions. Talking about objects, I want to make sure that certain objects, entities, users, groups, host groups, that they are customer specific, that they are not reported to the wrong sites or deployed to the wrong sites. I have several types of objects that could be only global or that could be customer specific. So we have a list of customer aware objects, so objects that can be configured so that they are only present in a certain context, which would be the global settings, of course. And then per site, I can have my own global settings. This was already in the previous versions. And if I link a site to a customer, I can also take the global settings as well as the hosts and folders. And through this indirect channel of sites, I can link them to a customer. Of course, the users within a customer should, of course, only be linked to that customer, but I can also create global users. So for me as a manager, this is quite useful because maybe I want to log into all of my customer sites at once without having an individual user. For example, there is a provider admin user who can log into all the sites if he wants to. LDAP connections can be very individual per customer, as you can imagine. Of course, they can be linked to customers separately, just as well as groups for context, hosts, and services. They can also be referred accordingly, as well as passwords, like access for databases. We heard a few examples. Of course, now in the CheckMK 1.4, we have a password management system, and within that system, I can set up which password belongs to which customer. Same goes for the event console rules. There are a few special details to this that I maybe can get into later on if I still have the time. So talking about the mechanics there. The global objects that currently will remain global as they have always been global. These are still right now aggregations and host tags. We left it at that simply because we are still in development, and as of today we cannot say we finished all this. So we have the BI aggregation and think it is useful to make it customer specific, same for host tags, although it's quite a bit difficult with the host tags because they are relating to so many different components. I mean, notification rules, host tags, water rules, they all can have host tags, and it goes through so many levels. And we have to think of something useful, and we haven't found the final perfect idea yet, but we know that we have to do something in these lines. So single tags could be combined to a tag group and be customer specific. Same goes for entire tag groups. I mean, that's quite obvious that we need to do this, and we're going to work on that. But now finally, talking about the global objects, this is something that we do not intend to make customer specific, which are the roles, like the objects over which I then structure the permission and control them. So who can do what. The time periods is something that is so general that even with your standard time periods you should be fine, or at least you can formulate them in a manner that they are not in any way secret or confidential, so they cannot be given away to anybody else. Extensions is something that perhaps you want to have your own extensions, but for simplicity reasons, we don't want to have customized extension. Same goes for alert handlers and custom attributes. There may be more object types that we haven't considered yet, but everything I haven't mentioned in the slides before will remain global, and time will show, and practical experience will show what else is necessary really. I did mention it shortly, the object scopes we have. So depending on the object type, I can have a global scope. So with users I have that, with hosts I do not have that because a host needs to be part of a site directly. So this depends on the object really. Then I have the scope provider, which is just a customer underneath, but it's a special role anyway because even the manager side is part of the provider, and then of course the customer scope. Of course, especially on the manager side, to make it look a bit nicer, this customer management, we have built a few views. It's a new dashboard that looks similar to the normal dashboard, the main overview. We have created a separate snap-in, which works similar to the site snap-in. So with one click, I can switch on all sites of a customer or a group of customers, and I switch them on and off. So in my central view, I can build a view. If I want to see one customer, I can then just see a few objects that belong to that customer. Also, quite useful are filters for the customers. So in the dashboards, so I can just create manual views that only include a certain number of customers. Painters, of course. Of course, I want to have columns for customers. So how do I do a migration as a service provider if I have the first CheckMK release with Managed Service Edition? And this will happen within one of the next 1.4 releases. The builds for the Managed Service Edition will be in there, and the customers who have this support contract option, they can directly download the version and start working with it. The migration works like this. I have my common OMD update command. It's pretty much like an Enterprise Edition command, but the short form is CME and not CEE. Then the situation is that all objects are being assigned to the provider, which is a default customer that exists. It cannot be deleted. The provider is always there in a setup, and it always makes sense to have one. And all the objects, all the sites, all the hosts and users, they are all global. That is the original state. And I can take one site, the central site, I can update it, I can update customer sites, I can update all the sites, and functionally, there is no change in my environment. As soon as I start assigning customers to sites, or sites to customers, and I edit a site and add a customer, and of course the customer has to be created in the environment, then the operative changes begin. The hosts and folders that are linked to that site are then linked to the customer, and in that step, I should also make sure that I have at least one global user for that customer, or at least one customer user, because otherwise, if I have a replicate next time, I cannot log into the site anymore. Because if the customer has no users, then nobody can log into the customer site, which I guess I would want to do. But there's also a warning dialog. So if you do the linking and there is no user on the customer side, you get a warning. Please, you should do that because you do get notifications, but you cannot see much because you cannot log into the remote GUI at all. As an admin user, of course, you can still see everything. Then we have users and make them customer specific, host groups, customer groups. If you have specific objects here, then you can make it more and more concrete. You can also start with single customers and then operatively keep working on it. So if you have a customer and it all works for that customer, then you can go into the site and look at other customers and see that things work and that there is less information in the files. So let's see whether I can get the technology running. It takes a little while, but I want to show you something. So what we see here is a virtual machine. It's a CheckMK Work 1 in the present version. I am now the provider and I have several sites set up onto this one system. Of course, in reality, the sites will be distributed onto various systems that may be at the customer locally. From here, I can access the web surface from the appliance. Here we can see the site management. I can see that my sites are all running and they are all running with Enterprise Edition. Now I log into my master. And I can see a few hosts. I think you can see it. It's a bit cropped on the side. But I can see the servers at the customers. I can see my own server. In Wato, it looks like this. I'm on a top level, and per customer, I have a folder, and within these, I have the host at the customers. The folders are then linked to the sites, or they belong to the sites. So monitor one site, and the permissions over the contact groups are set up. And here I can start with the migration. So what I open here is the appliance surface, and I go to my sites, and I want to get them to the Managed Service Edition. And I just click Update and pick the right version. Very conveniently, it picked it for me. I start with the master here. It's quite a quick thing to do because there are not that many changes required on the site. Of course, it stops during the update. I have to restart the site afterwards. And then I do the same step for my customer, like Yummy Foods. So this is the OMG update, which used to be on the command line. Now I can open my GUI again, and if I reload the page, I can already see what difference it made. Here I can see the word managed, which shows me that I am now in a managed edition. The customer sites should, of course, also run the managed service edition, because otherwise on the target page you won't have all the features. So if you want to run the pages like we did here with the limited configuration, you do need the managed service edition on both sides. So if we then go to the distributed monitoring view, then we can already see in several views that there are more columns. Suddenly there is the property customer. So a site can now have a customer. And this is something, as I said, that the sites are first linked to the provider. For the master, that makes sense, of course. It's supposed to remain this way, but for the Yummy Food site, I am now setting the customer. I tried to. So here, of course, I have to start, create a new customer to which I can link it. Of course, there will be more properties for this customer at some point, but for now, I'm just starting an entry, and then I can set a reference from any other point, for example, coming from the site. I save it, and then I have the error alert that I mentioned before. It says you can continue, but you should start a global user or a user for the site, which I will do now. It does make sense, of course. I take my CMK admin and make sure that he's the provider admin user that I want to have for all sites. So I'm setting it from provider to global, and then I can make sure that this user can be replicated for all the user sites. In the user sites and in the master site, this user is then usable. Here we have another column that came in, so now we have a global user. Other users are all provider users, but as I am here, I can take this user and make sure it belongs to the right customer, and thus I can make sure that the people at the customer, the users there, can log in with the user called Yummy to access their information. Right, so that's activated. So this worked. And we can see the dashboard I had mentioned. It's a bit, I mean, the resolution isn't perfect. It's all a bit tight here, but I think you can see the changes on the left side. There's a new list of customers where there's a sum of the status. How is this customer doing? I can keep clicking on lower level views and see details. What would be a problem? If you look at it closely, I have a view all hosts from Yummy Food Inc. That is the customer. And I have a headline where it says Yummy Food Inc. twice. The first is the customer's name, the second is the site ID. If the customer has several sites, of course, we would have to group it by sites and we would be visible as groups. And then I can click on the host and look at the actual issues. Just to make it a little clearer, I'm going to show you the additional Snapen. It's here under the point customers. I can also be directed to the customer system, but just like inside Snapen, through a click onto the online field, I can choose not to look at the customer system right now. It's just for me, the setting. I can just choose to view or not view it in the GUI for me personally. And this is pretty much the changeover for the version upgrade and the updating of one customer, which is quite a simple thing to do. It's quite straightforward. One view we have down here. I can show you that right now it's under the other level because we only have one customer specific top level view. But if we were to have more in the future, of course, next to host and service, it would make sense to have all these entities as their own nodes. Right now, this is what we have.
Vielleicht noch
Okay, then maybe just a small excursion to another point, event consoles. So it's a little bit more specific in this area. So there are two levels right here. So I can either have rule packs and then really regulate the console in here. So there are some constellations where you need the individual rules in rule packs and you want to have them for individual customers, and then maybe also whole rule packs. And that's why that's possible. You can configure that, and you just need to know that whatever you configure in a rule pack, the individual setting would be overwritten. So that means if I write a rule in the default rule pack right here, so let's just name it test, and then I say, okay, yummy foods. I save it, then you can see, okay, this is for our customer. We see that in the column, and at the point in time where I say, okay, I'm gonna do rule pack customer on this level, so I'm gonna determine the customer right here. Then this really determines, this entry determines what's applied. So you can see that right here. You can see this is the provider, and it's the rule pack. So set by rule pack, and that's maybe something that you might expect at first, but it's definitely something that you can see in the GUI, so you can definitely follow the whole idea. Other than that, there's another thing for the Service Edition right here. I can show you that separately as well. So up here we have the tab GUI design. So we have the logo update the design right here that I just mentioned. So we have the color set that you can choose as well. So overall, I'm looking for a picture on my system. I upload it, and then after this, I reload. You see that picture right here. So this is being replaced. And the whole thing, of course, is then also distributed to the remote sites. That's really the point behind it. So for your end client, you want to show this is my product or my system that is being accessed. So I don't have an appropriate logo right here. Let's see. Not well prepared, it seems, but let's do the Managed Service Edition logo. So you can just see the effect. So it's going to be a yellow up here, so you can see the color just changed. So of course, in terms of the user, that is then going to be the customer logo or whatever. So you just have to adapt it to the color scheme a little bit so it looks nice. And the color set is also something that works right away. And of course, it's then replicated as well. So of course, you can also have CheckMK be available in gray or other colors that you see here. So the idea behind it is that you have a base color, and in the GUI you have different shadings or lighter areas and buttons right here on the side, and that is then always dependent on the main color, and that's the main idea behind these color sets right now. And yeah, they're just nice things you can do, definitely. So everybody can just find something that suits their taste. And there's a nice brown in here as well, so many different options. And this was just as an idea for maybe new color sets, you know. So it doesn't work with every color. So if the color is too bright and then you then have a brighter color than that, then you might not be able to see it anymore. So those are just examples. I'm not sure if somebody would actually do that for their customer, but you never know. Maybe on April Fool's Day. But it's definitely available. Okay, do you have a question? So is it on purpose that the logo then also changes in color? Well, yeah. So it's embedded right here, yeah. You mean the brown one? You can see it. a lot right here, but that's what it is currently, but you can change that very easily. Well, we can change it very easily. So if we figure out that doesn't make any sense, then of course we can take that out as well. So overall, internally, we have some rules that influence the individual standard style. So it's either a background color that can be reversed or a color like that could be negative, or maybe change the colors, and that is something that we could just easily replace or take out. That's definitely possible. And like I said, this is maybe in terms of the color sets, it's an experiment at this point. Some work, some don't work. And I'm sure that is going to something that's going to be developed further so that you can manually choose all different colors and then just have more control over what it's going to look like. So maybe then using the elements that are round, you might be able to make squares out of them and things like that. All that might be possible, so we're definitely going to work on that a little bit more. I have a question. This feature would also be interesting for the other editions as well. Why did you decide to only do it for the Manage edition? Well, that was just a decision we made. We said, okay, this is a thing that is definitely something that we want, and it's just part of the regular use case. And overall, the logo upload is something that you can still do already. You can just replace the files. It's just not as convenient. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm asking. Well, I don't want to say we're never going to do that, because at one point in time we might say, okay, we need it for this one as well, and then we might include it, but it's not set in stone right now. But right now we feel like it's not absolutely necessary for that. So overall, that's not the core feature of this edition, and it's just the convenience aspect. Okay, thank you, Lars. I think the idea with the colors is actually very fascinating. I'm a little disappointed how little you can do, but we have a couple customers that are in the public sector, and then of course barrier-free is always a big aspect, and of course there's not a lot of contrast. So it would be very nice is if you could maybe have a color scheme that really increases the contrast a lot more. That you could maybe recognize or see things easier. All the shadings should be left out with one click of a button, so you just black and white's left or something like that, or maybe green and red, that you can exchange that, because there are some people that really have some weaknesses in that area as well. And maybe that would also be something that could be very helpful. That's not only for CME, but also for the Enterprise Edition could be very interesting. And I would really hope for a little bit more flexibility in that area, because for some customers it actually leads to the fact that they say, okay, either they can't use the product or we can't use the employees with this product, and that can definitely be a problem. That can be difficult. Are you planning on doing that? Well, not as of right now, but in terms of what's possible, I can say, okay, we really have a good basis now with what we've already done. So overall, we now have the possibility. We have a lot of GUI elements that were set graphs beforehand, and now they're style sheets, so elements that can be styled dynamically. You can take out shadings and things like that. So now we really have a great basis for that. And to really set it up in a way that you can really define each individual color, that's not far away anymore. That's something that we're very close to, and that's something that would definitely make sense. So I'm sure that's going to be possible. The problem are elements that are still made up of graphics, because you can't replace them as easily, and you would have to replace pictures under it, and then you would have to design it yourself, or really correct colors. That might be a lot of work. Maybe we're going to find a better way to do that as well. We're going to have to wait and see, but there's definitely room for improvement here. I have a question about notifications. You said on one of your first slides, the sender notifications, is that something that you can configure, that you can also send them decentralized? So for example, you have customer sites and they send decentralized notifications if that is necessary? Well, we don't have any limits right here. So at this point, you can, just like the Enterprise Edition, you can configure it, but you just have to remember a couple things. Things like, for example, user notification rules So those could create some problems when it comes to just customers, because maybe the customer profiles would be synchronized down. That is something that's happening currently, but that's something we want to change as well, so that the local user settings that are being set when you're logging in the GUI, for example, you can have notification rules so they don't get lost. So if you don't use the user notification rules at all, then that shouldn't be a problem. And that's really the main task. Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, so you said the standard way for the customer access to monitoring was a local IP, so the local network with credentials, so the customer can then log in. And you said that it's very unlikely that they would log into the provider. So I do see some use cases for that, that he would go to the provider portal and log in there to really look at the monitoring that's provided there, where he can just see the monitoring. And of course, that would then have to be done by proxy, for example. It should be so quickly that if he's in his customer network, for example, it's not routed via the provider, but locally. And is that something that you can't imagine that this could be supported, or is it already supported, or what's the situation like? Well, it is the same as it is in many situations at CheckMK. You can really think of many different options and implement them, but what I showed you, what I outlined, is really our standard for now. And of course, in notifications or in the GUI access, there could be variances. So you could also have a separate viewer site, for example, in the central spot, and then let the customer access that. That could also be possible. That could work as well. But of course, you would have to look into detail more. You'd have to look at all the requirements. They can vary quite a bit. So we definitely can talk about that, what could make sense. Well, if you really want to use that extensively, then of course many viewer sites that route locally, that could definitely make sense. Yeah.
I have basically the same question as he has.
Also ich habe mich gefragt, wir haben hier die Web-GUI, die Multisite, und wenn ich da mich einlogge als, wie heißt das? Die User-Site, die man created hat, also wenn man dann als User einloggt, sieht man dann das, was zugelassen ist? Ja, dann kann man sich tatsächlich nicht einloggen, nicht in die zentrale Master-Site. Das geht nicht, die ist also gesperrt. Also das ist ein weiterer Check, den wir in der Managed Service Edition machen, damit da einfach kein Zugriff zugelassen ist. Aha, okay, also es ist nur lokal supported. Ja. I have a quick question. So if I have a Watto site that is configured locally, where the configuration is not pushed from the master site to the slide, can I still include it as a customer site, or would that create an error message, an error notification? Well, what you can do is you can still have a distributed configuration without the Watto. So then you're not pushing your configuration down. That's exactly what you just said. But what you don't have at that point in time is the characteristic when it comes to host. So which customer it belongs to, for example, which you would have to do in the local Watto is to really then put the customer in and then link it. Then on the master side, you also can see that. Okay, you said earlier that a provider side and the management side. I think I missed something. I'm not sure what we are talking about right now. Are we on the provider side or the managing side? Well, this site that I'm logging into with the GUI is my master site, and that means for me overall, I'm configuring my monitoring in there, and I see the customers and objects that belong to these customers. What I don't do in there is really monitor my own host, so the provider's host. I'm currently doing that on a separate site right now, and that's a limitation that's still there in the 140. And in future versions, we are going to change that so that that can all be done on one site. So that is something that there are some conceptual problems with the CheckMK 1.4 with the existing architecture. We just have to change something so that we have one site for the management side and monitoring side at the same time with a few less configurations. The problem is that the files that configure the way to the core is using one-to-one for the local configuration, and that's the